This is a violation of aesthetic conformity, Mr. Miller. Your weed patch had to go. The words, delivered with the smug finality of a petty tyrant, hung in the diesel-choked air between us. Karen, the self-appointed empress of the Oakmont Creek Homeowners Association, stood with her arms crossed over a garish floral blouse that strained at the seams, a clipboard clutched in one hand like a scepter. Behind her, two men with commercial-grade brush hogs were finishing their work, turning the last vibrant pockets of purple coneflower and golden black-eyed Susans into a churned, muddy ruin. The air, which just this morning had smelled of damp earth and honey from the clover, now reeked of exhaust fumes and the green, bitter scent of slaughtered vegetation. My meadow, my 3-year project, my living memorial to my wife Sarah, was gone. It wasn't just grass and flowers, it was a carefully curated ecosystem of native plants, a sanctuary for bees and butterflies, and the last physical thing I had built with her in mind. Now it was a brown, weeping scar on the land, and this woman, this Karen, was looking at me as if she'd just done me a favor by ripping my heart out. I felt a cold, familiar calm settle over me, the kind that precedes the storm, the one that had served me well through 2 tours as an Army Corps of Engineers officer. My hands, clenched into fists at my sides, didn't tremble. My voice, when it came out, was dangerously level. "You hired a crew," I stated, not a question, "to come onto my private property and destroy my landscaping." She scoffed, a dismissive, airy sound. "Your landscaping was a patch of overgrown weeds in direct violation of Bylaw 7, Section 4. All visible frontage must be maintained as manicured turf. We sent you 3 notices. I had received the notices. I had also responded to each one with certified letters of my own, citing state ordinances protecting pollinator habitats, and including a letter from a local university's botany department praising the ecological value of the meadow. She had ignored them all. "You had no right," I said, the words like chips of ice. "This is my property. The HOA covenant does not grant you the authority to hire contractors to perform work on a homeowner's land without their consent or a court order." Karen's smile was a thin, triumphant slash of crimson lipstick. "The board held an emergency vote. It was unanimous. Your negligence was bringing down property values. We have a duty to act." She gestured with her clipboard toward the ravaged earth. "Now it's a clean slate. You can lay down some nice, uniform sod like everyone else. The HOA will even cover half the cost as a gesture of goodwill." The sheer, breathtaking arrogance of it was like a physical blow. The destruction, the trespass, and now this condescending offer to help me pay, to erase the last trace of my work, of Sarah's memory. I looked past her, at the muddy tracks the machinery had left, at the mangled stems and crushed blossoms. I saw a monarch butterfly, confused, fluttering over the devastation where its milkweed used to be. The cold calm in my gut began to burn, transforming from ice into white-hot steel. I looked back at Karen, meeting her beady, self-satisfied eyes. She saw the shift in me, her smugness faltering for just a fraction of a second. She thought she had won. She thought this was over. She had no idea what was just beginning. Have you ever felt that white-hot rage, that feeling of complete violation by someone drunk on a tiny sliver of power? If you know what I'm talking about, hit that subscribe button and tell me your own HOA nightmare in the comments below. I want to hear where you're watching from, because this kind of injustice happens everywhere. Now let me tell you how this all started, and more importantly, how it ended. It didn't end with me laying down sod. It ended with Karen's reign in ruins, her face on the local news, and an EPA fine so large it made her sell the very house she was trying to protect the property value of. This wasn't just about a garden. This was about a war she started, and I, a man who knows a thing or two about strategy, was going to finish it. The story of the meadow began not with dirt and seeds, but with loss. After 25 years in the Army Corps of Engineers, building bridges and managing waterways in places I can't name, I came home to a silence that was heavier than any combat zone. My wife, Sarah, had lost her battle with cancer while I was on my final deployment. The house we'd bought in Oakmont Creek, the one we were supposed to retire in together, felt like a hollow museum of a life that was supposed to be. Sarah had been the life, the color. She was a biologist. A woman who saw the world not as a collection of things, but as a web of interconnected systems. She could name every bird by its song and every wildflower by the shape of its leaf. Our plan for this 5-acre plot on the edge of the development was to let a portion of it return to its natural state, to create a native prairie meadow. "We'll be custodians, Jack," she'd said, her hands sketching designs on a napkin at our kitchen table. "Not conquerors. We'll bring back the native grasses, the flowers that belong here. The bees and butterflies will come back. It will be alive." After she was gone, the napkin with her drawing became a sacred text. The project became my therapy, my connection to her. I spent the first year just preparing the land, clearing the invasive species the developer had left behind, carefully amending the soil. I didn't just throw seeds down. I researched. I sourced genetically appropriate native seeds from specialized nurseries: big bluestem and Indian grass, purple coneflower, butterfly weed, black-eyed Susans, and a dozen other varieties specific to our region. I learned their names, their needs, their ancient relationships with the insects in the soil. The front acre of my property, the part visible from the quiet subdivision road, was transformed from a boring stretch of contractor-grade fescue into a tapestry of life. The first year, it looked a little scraggly as the perennials established their roots. The second year, it exploded. By the third spring, the one that had just ended so brutally, it was a masterpiece. It swayed and moved with the wind, a sea of greens, purples, yellows, and oranges. It was loud with the buzz of 1,000 different kinds of bees, from tiny sweat bees to fat, fuzzy bumblebees. Finches feasted on the seed heads, and the air was thick with monarchs, swallowtails, and fritillaries. It wasn't just beautiful, it was functional, a thriving ecosystem that required no pesticides, no fertilizer, and far less water than the chemically dependent green concrete lawns of my neighbors. It was, in every sense, Sarah's dream made real. The trouble started subtly. About 6 months after the first flowers appeared, a crisp white envelope appeared in my mailbox, sealed with the official-looking Oakmont Creek HOA logo. It was a friendly reminder about landscape maintenance, with a highlighted copy of Bylaw 7, Section 4, the infamous manicured turf clause. I read it, saw it for the bureaucratic nonsense it was, and filed it away. 2 months later, a second letter arrived, this one less friendly. It was a formal notice of violation, accusing me of cultivating noxious weeds and letting my property fall into a state of unkempt disarray. It demanded I rectify the situation within 30 days or face a fine of $50. I knew then I was dealing with someone who equated natural with neglected. I typed up a formal response. I explained that my meadow was not weeds, but a deliberately cultivated native pollinator habitat. I cited 2 state-level environmental protection statutes that encourage the creation of such habitats. I attached color photographs of the meadow, with labels identifying the different plant species. And, for good measure, I included a printout of an article from a state university extension service about the ecological dangers of monoculture turf lawns. I sent it via certified mail, return receipt requested. The $50 fine never appeared on my HOA statement, and for a while there was silence. I thought, perhaps naively, that reason had prevailed. I should have known better. Power, especially the petty kind wielded by HOA presidents, doesn't respond to reason. It only understands dominance. The silence was broken a month later by a third letter, this one hand-delivered by Karen herself. I saw her silver SUV pull up, and she marched to my door with the posture of a drill sergeant. When I opened it, she didn't even say hello. "Mr. Miller," she began, her voice dripping with condescension, "we received your letter." She said the word letter as if it were a piece of trash. "While your little hobby is quaint, it does not supersede the community covenants you agreed to when you purchased your home. This is a neighborhood of standards. Your property is an eyesore." I remained calm, leaning against the doorframe. "Karen, my property is an ecological asset. Your standards are killing the local bee population and polluting the watershed with fertilizer runoff. My meadow is doing the exact opposite." Her face flushed a blotchy red. "Do not lecture me about the environment, Mr. Miller. I am the president of this association, and I am telling you your weed field is unacceptable. You are being officially fined $200 for continued non-compliance, and you have 14 days to mow it down." I just looked at her. I won't be doing that, and I won't be paying the fine. It's an illegal fine based on a misinterpretation of a vaguely worded bylaw that likely wouldn't stand up in court. Her eyes narrowed into slits. "We'll see about that," she hissed and spun on her heel, marching back to her gas-guzzling SUV. That was the last direct contact I had with her before the day she brought in the brush hogs. She had skipped the legal process, the hearings, the court orders. She had bypassed civilization and gone straight to scorched earth. She thought it was a display of power, a final, unanswerable move. What she didn't understand was that in destroying my property, she hadn't ended the conflict. She had merely given me a cause of action. She had declared war, and in doing so, had handed me all the ammunition I would ever need. Karen's next move was predictable. She weaponized the bureaucracy. Having failed to intimidate me with illegal fines and verbal threats, she decided to change the rules of the game itself. A notice went out to all homeowners announcing a special meeting of the board of directors to discuss and vote on an amendment to the landscape bylaws. The proposed amendment was clearly written with me in mind. It was a masterpiece of petty tyranny, seeking to replace the vague, manicured turf language with something brutally specific. The new proposal, designated Amendment 7-4B, would explicitly prohibit any non-turf grass ground cover on more than 10% of any residential lot's forward-facing frontage, and further define non-turf as any collection of grasses, forbs, or flowering plants exceeding an average height of 8 inches. It was a legal straitjacket designed to outlaw my meadow and anything like it. It was, in essence, the Jack Miller Amendment. I knew I had to attend the meeting. I also knew that walking in there alone and angry would be pointless. I spent the week preparing, not for a fight, but for a presentation. I put together a concise professional PowerPoint. The first few slides showed beautiful, high-resolution photos of the meadow in full bloom, teeming with bees and butterflies. The next slides were the data, charts showing the reduction in water usage compared to a traditional lawn, statistics on the decline of native pollinators and how habitats like mine were crucial to their survival, and quotes from the Audubon Society and the National Wildlife Federation. I included maps of the local watershed showing how my unfertilized, deep-rooted prairie plants were preventing erosion and filtering runoff, directly benefiting the creek that gave our subdivision its name. I even had a slide with photos of my neighbors' lawns, showing patches of brown, chemical-burned grass, and signs warning kids and pets to stay off the recently sprayed turf. My final slide was a simple, powerful question. What kind of community do we want to be? One that values conformity and chemicals, or one that values life and health? I printed out handouts, professional trifold brochures summarizing my points. I was ready to appeal to their reason, to their wallets, less water usage, and to their sense of community pride. The meeting was held in the sterile beige community clubhouse, a room that smelled faintly of chlorine from the adjacent pool. About 30 homeowners were there, which was a decent turnout. Karen and the other 4 board members sat at a long table at the front, looking solemn and important. Karen, in a power red blazer, called the meeting to order with a sharp rap of a small wooden gavel. She read the proposed amendment in a flat, monotone voice, then opened the floor for discussion. "The purpose of this amendment," she said, her eyes sweeping the room, but deliberately avoiding me, "is to clarify our community standards and protect the aesthetic integrity and property values of Oakmont Creek." A few of her known cronies, people I'd seen her having wine with on her deck, nodded in agreement. A man in the front row, a retired insurance salesman named Gary, spoke up. "I, for one, am glad we're finally addressing this. I don't want to look at a field of weeds when I drive down the street. It looks trashy." I saw my moment and stood up. "Madam President, members of the board, my name is Jack Miller, and I live at 412 Aspen Lane. The field of weeds Mr. Harper is referring to is my property." I had their attention. I calmly asked for permission to use the projector, and to my surprise, Karen, probably wanting to appear fair, agreed with a tight, dismissive wave of her hand. For 10 minutes, I walked them through my presentation. I kept my voice even and respectful. I wasn't an angry homeowner. I was an educator. I presented facts, not feelings. I could see some people in the audience start to shift in their seats. I saw a young couple exchange a look. I saw an older woman, Mrs. Gable from down the street, nodding slowly as I spoke about the butterflies. I was making headway. When I finished, there was a moment of silence, then a smattering of applause. The young woman, her name was Jessica, raised her hand. "I think Mr. Miller has a point," she said. "My kids have asthma, and the pesticide company our neighbor uses makes it worse. A yard that doesn't need chemicals sounds like a good thing." And it was beautiful. Karen's face had been growing darker with every slide I presented. The applause, however small, was the final straw. She slammed her gavel down, the sound cracking through the room. "This is not a debate about ecology," she snapped, her voice shrill. "This is about rules. The rules you all agreed to. Mr. Miller is asking for a special exemption from the rules that everyone else has to follow." She then launched into a tirade, a masterclass in fear-mongering. She spoke of falling property values, of our neighborhood turning into a hippie commune. She twisted my words, claiming I wanted to force everyone to have a wild jungle in their front yard. She painted me as an outsider, a troublemaker who thought he was better than everyone else. She was no longer trying to win with logic. She was inciting a mob. "We are a community of distinction," she bellowed, her face florid. "We are not a nature preserve. We have an image to uphold. All in favor of adopting Amendment 7-4B, say aye." Her three allies on the board shouted, "Aye!" Immediately, a few other voices, including Gary's, joined in. "All opposed?" she asked, rushing the words. I said nay in a clear, firm voice. So did Jessica and her husband, and Mrs. Gable, and two or three others. It was close, maybe a third of the room, but Karen wasn't counting. "The A's have it," she declared, banging her gavel again with triumphant finality. "The amendment is passed. The meeting is adjourned." It was a sham, a railroad job. She hadn't followed parliamentary procedure. She hadn't called for a proper count. She had used the force of her personality and her official position to bully her agenda through. As people started to file out, some looking uncomfortable, Mrs. Gable came over to me and gently touched my arm. "That was a disgrace, Mr. Miller," she whispered, her eyes full of sympathy. "She's a bully. Don't you give up." I looked over at Karen, who was basking in the congratulations of her clique, a smug smile plastered on her face. I gave Mrs. Gable a small, reassuring nod. "Don't worry," I said, my voice low. "I have no intention of giving up. She just made a very, very big mistake." The illegal vote was just one more piece of evidence. The destruction of my meadow, I realized, wasn't the end of her overreach. It was the beginning. She had just publicly documented her bias and her willingness to disregard rules to get her way. And I had it all on a high-quality audio recording from my phone. The day of the destruction, I had been at a routine appointment at the VA hospital an hour away. It was a clear, crisp morning, and I remember feeling a sense of peace on the drive home, looking forward to spending the afternoon just sitting by the meadow, watching the life within it. I turned onto my street and saw the truck first, a big white commercial flatbed with a landscaping company's logo on the side, parked awkwardly on the shoulder. Then I heard it, the guttural, grinding roar of machinery that cuts through everything. My stomach clenched. I accelerated, my old pickup rumbling in protest. As I pulled into my driveway, the scene unfolded like a nightmare. Two men in dirty jeans and sweat-stained t-shirts were operating industrial-grade brush cutters, the kind used for clearing highway medians, not residential yards. They were moving in a systematic pattern across my front acre, leaving a trail of churned earth and shredded plant matter in their wake. And there, standing like a conquering general on my violated land, was Karen. She held her clipboard, watching the destruction with a look of profound satisfaction. The rage that hit me was a physical force, a white-hot wave that threatened to consume me. But years of training kicked in, pushing the rage down, encasing it in ice. Emotion was a liability. Action was the solution. I killed the engine, got out of my truck, and walked toward her, my boots sinking into the newly soft, wounded ground. That's when she delivered her infamous line about aesthetic conformity in the weed patch. After her smug pronouncement, After she offered to help me pay for the sod, I just stood there for a long moment, letting her think she had cowed me. I pulled out my phone. "What was the name of the company you hired?" I asked, my voice devoid of any inflection. She looked momentarily confused by the question. "Why does that matter?" "I'll need it for the police report," I said flatly, "and for the lawsuit." The word lawsuit hung in the air. Her smugness flickered. "You can't sue me," she scoffed, recovering quickly. "The HOA is indemnified. The board voted. We are fully within our rights." "You are standing on my private property," I said, panning my phone's camera slowly, deliberately across the devastation, making sure to capture the landscaping truck, the workers, and her, standing right in the middle of it all. "You hired a commercial crew to enter my property without my consent and destroy over $20,000 worth of specialized, cultivated plants. That is trespass and destruction of property. That's a crime. The HOA's indemnification doesn't cover criminal acts." The color drained from her face. She had clearly never considered that what she was doing was anything more than enforcing a rule. The idea of police, of actual legal consequences beyond a scolding letter, had not entered her little kingdom. I walked over to the two workers who had shut down their machines and were now watching us nervously. "Can I get the name of your supervisor?" I asked them politely. They exchanged a look. The older one, a man with a deeply lined face, wiped his brow. "Look, mister, we were just told to clear this lot. The lady," he jerked a thumb toward Karen, "she said it was all approved, showed us the work order from the HOA. "I'm sure she did," I said calmly. "It's not your fault, but she didn't have the authority to issue that order. I just need your company's name for the record." He gave it to me, along with his foreman's name. I thanked him. Then I turned back to Karen, who was now looking genuinely flustered. "You should probably leave my property now, Karen." She sputtered, trying to regain her footing. "This is an official HOA action. I have every right to be here to supervise." "No, you don't," I said, my voice dropping to that low, dangerous level again. "You are a trespasser. Leave, now, or my next call will be to have you removed." For the first time, she looked afraid. The power dynamic had shifted in the span of 2 minutes. She was no longer the enforcer, she was the perpetrator. Without another word, she turned, stumbled slightly on the uneven ground, and marched back to her SUV, her power-red blazer looking ridiculous against the backdrop of ruin she had created. As soon as she was gone, I dialed 911. A sheriff's deputy arrived about 20 minutes later. He was professional, patient, and listened to my story. He looked at the devastation, at my certified mail receipts, and at the video I had taken. He was sympathetic, but ultimately, frustratingly, he shrugged. "I hear you, Mr. Miller. I really do. And what she did is wrong. But your HOA covenants are a civil contract. This is likely going to be a civil matter, not a criminal one. Trespassing maybe, but the DA will probably say it's for the courts to sort out because of the HOA agreement." He suggested I file a report for documentation purposes, which I did, but he made it clear that no one was going to be arrested today. The initial fire of my rage had been banked by the cold water of civic procedure. But as the deputy drove away and I stood alone in the silence, looking at the dead field, the rage didn't die. It cooled. It hardened. It turned from a wildfire into a focused, high-energy laser. A civil matter. Fine. If she wanted a civil fight, she would get one. But I wasn't going to play on her turf. I wasn't going to get bogged down in a multi-year lawsuit over the value of my flowers. That was her game. A war of attrition designed to bleed me dry of money and resolve. No, my training taught me to choose my own battlefield. And as I knelt, picking up a crushed stalk of butterfly weed, I noticed something. The ground here was darker, still damp from the morning dew. The brush hog had scraped away the top layer of vegetation, revealing the subtle contour of the land beneath. And I saw it, a shallow, almost imperceptible channel. A swale, a seasonal creek bed that I knew from my own land survey before I bought the place, snaked across this corner of my property. A drainage path that connected, a quarter-mile downstream, to Oakmont Creek itself. And Oakmont Creek fed into the county reservoir. My mind, trained to see terrain and its implications, started to connect the dots. Landscaping, waterways, regulations. A new front in this war was opening up, one Karen couldn't possibly have anticipated. My fight was no longer just about my flowers. It was about the water. And that brought a whole new set of rules into play, federal rules. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table, the napkin with Sarah's drawing smoothed out under the light. The silence of the house felt different now. It wasn't just the quiet of loss. It was the quiet of a command center before an operation. My first call the next morning wasn't to a landscaper or a civil lawyer. It was to Dave Riley. Dave and I had served together in the Corps. He was a brilliant, sharp-witted JAG officer who had left the Army to become a partner at a top environmental law firm in the city. He specialized in exactly this kind of fight: land use, water rights, and tangling with the EPA. When I called him, I could hear the smile in his voice. "Jack Miller, to what do I owe the honor? Did you finally decide to pave over that paradise of yours and put up a parking lot?" "They did it for me, Dave," I said, and proceeded to lay out the entire story, from the first notice to the deputy's visit, to the churned-up mud that was once my meadow. I sent him the photos and the video of my confrontation with Karen. He was silent for a long time after I finished. When he spoke, the humor was gone from his voice, replaced by a cold, professional anger. "Jack, this is egregious. This isn't just an HOA dispute. This is wanton destruction. And you said she hired a commercial crew?" "That's right," I confirmed. "And I have their name." "Good," he said. "That's a lever. But forget the civil suit for a minute. That's slow and messy. You mentioned a swale, a seasonal creek bed." "Barely there," I said, "but it's on the original survey maps. It channels storm water from the upper part of my lot, runs under the road through a culvert, and drains toward the creek." I could practically hear the gears turning in his head. "Jack, does that creek feed into a municipal water source? A reservoir? A navigable river?" "The Oakmont Creek feeds directly into the Hatcher Reservoir," I said. "It's the main water supply for 3 counties. There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Oh, Karen," Dave murmured almost reverently. "You magnificent fool." He then gave me a rapid-fire education. The Clean Water Act, Section 404. Any activity that results in the discharge of dredged or fill material into the waters of the United States, or WOTUS, requires a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. The definition of WOTUS was notoriously broad and complex, but it absolutely could include intermittent streams, seasonal creek beds, and wetlands that have a significant nexus to larger bodies of water. She ordered a commercial crew to perform earth-moving activities because that's what a brush hog does at that scale. It dredges and fills, directly in and adjacent to a tributary of a primary drinking water source, Dave explained, his voice alight with the thrill of the legal chase. She did so without a survey, without a permit, and without any environmental assessment. She didn't just break an HOA bylaw, Jack. She likely committed a federal offense. The path forward became crystal clear. This was the battlefield I would choose. It was terrain I understood, governed by regulations I had once helped enforce. My first step was to formalize my alliance. I needed my neighbors. I started with Mrs. Gable, the elderly woman who had offered her support at the disastrous HOA meeting. I brought her a thermos of tea and a plate of cookies and sat with her on her porch. Her yard was immaculate, filled with roses and hydrangeas. It turned out Karen's reign of terror wasn't limited to my meadow. Mrs. Gable showed me a stack of violation notices she'd received. One was for a garden gnome that was not in keeping with the community's aesthetic. Another was for a wind chime that produced excessive noise. The most ridiculous was a fine for her bird feeder, which Karen claimed was attracting vermin. "She's a sad, power-hungry woman, Jack," Mrs. Gable said, her voice trembling slightly. "My late husband, Henry, put that gnome there. It's been there for 20 years. She told me to throw it on the trash heap." She agreed to write a signed statement detailing her history of harassment from Karen. My next stop was Jessica and her husband, Tom, the young couple with the asthmatic children. They were initially hesitant, afraid of retaliation. "Karen can make life miserable here," Tom said, looking over his shoulder as if she might materialize out of the neatly trimmed hedges. I didn't push. I just laid out my case calmly. I explained the potential EPA violation. I told them this wasn't just about my flowers anymore. It was about an HOA president who felt she was above the law. She used HOA funds, I hypothesized, to hire that crew. Your dues paid for the destruction of my property. What's next? Will she decide your kid's swing set is an eyesore and have it torn down while you're at work? That hit home. Jessica looked at Tom, her jaw set. He's right. This has to stop. We'll support you. They agreed to sign a statement as well, corroborating the sham vote at the special meeting and Karen's bullying tactics. Over the next week, I quietly canvassed the neighborhood. I found others. A family fined because their basketball hoop was left out overnight. A man ordered to repaint his front door because the shade of beige he'd used was, according to Karen, too warm. I was no longer a lone actor. I was the leader of a quiet insurrection. The narrative was changing. This wasn't Jack Miller, the weirdo with the weed patch, versus the HOA. This was Karen, the out-of-control president, versus the community she was supposed to serve. While I gathered these statements, Dave was drafting the first official salvo. It wasn't a lawsuit. It was something far more potent, a series of Freedom of Information Act, or FOIA, requests directed at the HOA board. We weren't just asking for documents. We were demanding a complete, unredacted accounting of the last 3 years of Karen's presidency. We requested all meeting minutes, all financial statements, all records of expenditures, every check written from the HOA account, and all correspondence related to violations and fines. It was a mountain of paperwork designed to bury them. But more importantly, it was a legal demand they could not ignore. The battle for the meadow was over. The war for Oakmont Creek had just begun. The next phase of my operation was all about documentation and preparation. It was the slow, methodical work that wins wars long before the first shot is fired. While we waited for the HOA to respond to our FOIA requests, a process legally mandated to have a deadline, I turned my property into a forensic evidence site. I hired a professional land surveyor, not just any surveyor, but one with specific certifications in wetland delineation. For 2 days, a team of experts was on my property with tripods, transits, and soil augers. They mapped every contour. They took soil samples along the seasonal creek bed, analyzing them for hydric soil indicators. They documented the remaining plant life, identifying the species the brush hogs had missed along the edges. Their final report was a thing of beauty, a 30-page document complete with color-coded topographical maps, soil profiles, and a legally airtight conclusion. The swale on my property met the federal criteria for a jurisdictional wetland due to its significant nexus with the Hatcher Reservoir. The report cost me $3,000, but it was worth every penny. It transformed my claim from a homeowner's angry suspicion into a scientific fact. While the surveyors worked, I was building my own file. I compiled every letter from Karen, every illegal fine notice, every certified mail receipt from my responses. I transcribed the audio recording from the sham HOA meeting. I had Mrs. Gable, Jessica, Tom, and 5 other homeowners write and sign affidavits detailing their own negative interactions with Karen, creating a clear and undeniable pattern of abuse, harassment, and overreach. This wasn't just about the meadow anymore. It was about establishing her character and her modus operandi for any legal authority that might review the case. My army buddy Dave was my strategic advisor, guiding my every move. "Don't get emotional, Jack. Just get evidence," he'd say in our nightly calls. "We're not building a court case yet. We're building a dossier. We're going to hand the government a prosecution on a silver platter." He also had me follow up with the landscaping company. I didn't threaten or accuse. I approached them as a fellow professional. I spoke to the owner, a man named Mike. I explained the situation calmly, showed him the property survey indicating the wetland, and explained the potential legal exposure his company now had for performing unpermitted work in a protected area. I made it clear my fight was with the HOA president, who had hired him under false pretenses. "She signed a work order, Mr. Miller," he said, his voice tight with worry. "It's got a clause on it where the client, the HOA, attests that all necessary permits have been secured." "I'm sure it does, Mike," I said, "and that's your protection. All I'm asking for is a copy of that signed work order and a sworn statement from you and your foreman about what Karen told you on the day of the job. He was hesitant at first, but when I mentioned the words EPA investigation and third-party liability, he became much more cooperative. 2 days later, a notarized affidavit from him and his foreman arrived at my lawyer's office, along with a copy of the work order, signed with Karen's florid, arrogant signature. It was the smoking gun, the direct link proving she alone had authorized the work and had contractually lied about having the permits to do it. Meanwhile, I turned my attention back to my own property. I installed a high-end security camera system, the kind with motion detection and night vision, covering the perimeter of my land, especially the damaged front acre. It felt like a violation of my own sense of peace, but it was a necessary precaution. I had a feeling Karen wasn't done. Sure enough, 3 days after the cameras went up, I got a notification on my phone. The footage showed Karen's silver SUV slowing to a crawl on the road in front of my house. The passenger door opened, and a man I recognized as Gary, her crony from the HOA meeting, leaned out and snapped a few pictures with his phone. They were documenting my failure to install the sod she had demanded. A week later, another alert. This time it was Karen herself. Emboldened by the dark, she got out of her car and physically trespassed onto my property line, her phone's flashlight beam cutting across the muddy ground as she took her own photos. The camera captured her face perfectly, illuminated in the glow of her screen, her expression a mixture of grim determination and spite. Each of these incursions was a small thing on its own, but together they formed a pattern of harassment and obsession. I downloaded the footage, saved it to a secure drive, and added it to the growing dossier. Finally, the response to our FOIA request arrived. It was a thin manila envelope, not the heavy box we had expected. The HOA's lawyer had sent back a letter stating that our request was overly broad and burdensome, and that they would only provide the minutes from the last 3 official board meetings. They had not included any financial records, no correspondence, no record of checks written. It was a classic Stonewall. Dave laughed when I told him. "Perfect," he said. "They've just handed us another weapon, willful non-compliance with a legitimate records request. It shows they have something to hide. Now we can get a court to compel them, and the judge is already going to be annoyed with them before we even start. Karen's arrogance is our greatest asset, Jack. She truly believes she's untouchable." With the surveyor's report, the affidavits from the neighbors, the statement from the landscaping company, the video evidence of her trespassing, and now the HOA's refusal to comply with the FOIA request, my dossier was nearly complete. It was a mountain of meticulously organized, cross-referenced evidence. It told a single, compelling story of a petty tyrant who had broken rules, bullied residents, and in her final, most arrogant act, violated federal law. The trap was almost ready to be sprung. The time had come to transition from defense to offense. With our dossier complete, Dave and I drafted the letter. It was not an angry screed or a list of grievances. It was a cold, precise legal instrument, a formal notice of intent, and it was designed to be a declaration of checkmate. We didn't send it just to Karen. We sent a copy via certified mail to every single member of the HOA Board of Directors at their individual home addresses. This was a critical distinction. We wanted to ensure no one could later claim they hadn't been informed. We were legally piercing the corporate veil of the HOA and putting each board member on personal notice. The letter began innocuously enough, stating my intent to seek full financial restitution for the destruction of my private property, itemizing the cost of the destroyed plants, the professional labor for the initial installation, and the estimated cost of a full ecological restoration. The total came to just over $28,000. This, we knew, would get their attention. The second paragraph was where the hammer fell. It formally notified the board that the act of destruction they had authorized had occurred within a designated jurisdictional wetland. As confirmed by a certified wetland delineator, a copy of the surveyor's full report was enclosed. It then cited, chapter and verse, the specific sections of the Federal Clean Water Act they had violated by authorizing the discharge of dredged material into the waters of the United States without a permit from the Army Corps of Engineers. It went on to explain the penalties for such a violation, which could include severe civil fines levied not only against the corporate entity of the HOA, but also against any individuals who directed, authorized, or participated in the violation. We made sure that phrasing was highlighted in bold. This was the part that put Karen and her cronies on the board directly in the crosshairs. To twist the knife, we attached copies of the key evidence: the signed work order from the landscaping company, where Karen personally attested to having all necessary permits, the sworn affidavit from the company's owner, and the high-resolution stills from my security cameras showing Karen trespassing on my property after the fact. The final paragraph was the trap. It did not demand an immediate payment or a settlement. Instead, it offered them a choice. They could either A, immediately agree to cover the full cost of the restoration, formally censure President Karen for her illegal actions, and begin the process of repealing the illegally passed Amendment 7-4B, or B. They could reject the offer, in which case we would not only proceed with a civil suit for damages, but would also be compelled by federal law to forward our entire dossier to the Regional Office of the Environmental Protection Agency for enforcement action. We gave them 10 business days to respond in writing. The letter was a masterpiece of legal strategy. It didn't leave them any room to wiggle. It forced them to confront the reality of their legal jeopardy. More importantly, it was designed to split the board. The members who had just gone along with Karen, the ones who were merely negligent rather than malicious, would now be staring at the possibility of massive personal fines because of her arrogance. Their loyalty to her would be tested against their own financial survival. We had created a prisoner's dilemma. Their only hope of a lesser punishment was to turn on their leader. The 10 days that followed were eerily quiet. The usual trickle of HOA newsletters and announcements stopped. I saw the board members' cars pull into Karen's driveway for what were clearly emergency, off-the-books meetings. I could only imagine the panic and recriminations happening inside that house. On the 9th day, a response came. It was from the HOA's lawyer, a curt, dismissive letter that reeked of Karen's own brand of hubris. It stated that the board rejected my extortionate demands and considered the wetland claim to be frivolous and without merit. It accused me of attempting to intimidate the board and reiterated their position that all actions were taken in accordance with the community's bylaws. They had chosen option B. Dave's reaction when I read him the letter over the phone was a single, delighted laugh. "She did it. I can't believe it, but she actually did it. She called our bluff." "It wasn't a bluff," I said. "I know," he replied, his voice giddy with anticipation, "but she didn't. She's so wrapped up in her own power that she couldn't conceive of a threat bigger than her own authority. She thinks the EPA is like some building inspector she can charm or bully. She has no idea what's about to hit her." That afternoon, Dave compiled our entire dossier into a single, comprehensive digital package. The surveyor's report, the affidavits from my neighbors, the video of Karen's trespassing, the audio from the HOA meeting, the statement from the landscaper, our notice of intent, and their lawyer's dismissive response. It was a complete narrative of a federal crime, delivered with all the evidence needed for a swift and decisive judgment. He uploaded it to the EPA's online portal for reporting environmental violations. The subject line was simple and direct: report of unpermitted discharge into a jurisdictional wetland, Oakmont Creek subdivision. The trap had been set, the bait had been taken, and now the jaws were about to snap shut. All I had to do was wait. The wheels of federal justice, I knew, could sometimes grind slowly. But when they started moving on a case this clean, this well-documented, they were unstoppable. Karen had made the fatal mistake of underestimating her enemy, and in doing so had sealed her own fate. The federal government, for all its perceived sluggishness, can move with terrifying speed when it wants to. Exactly 8 days after Dave submitted our report to the EPA, it happened. I was in my workshop, cleaning and oiling some old woodworking tools, when I saw the car pull up through the window. It wasn't a sheriff's cruiser or a delivery truck. It was a dark blue Ford sedan with the unmistakable, discreet government plates. A man in a crisp polo shirt with a small EPA logo embroidered on the chest got out. He was holding a tablet and had an air of calm, unshakable authority. He didn't come to my door. He walked directly to the edge of the ruined meadow, his eyes scanning the terrain, comparing it to the maps I knew he had on his device. I watched him for a few minutes, then walked outside. "Can I help you?" I asked. He looked up, his expression neutral. "Are you Mr. Jack Miller?" "I am," he nodded. "Agent Davies, EPA Region 4. We received a report regarding some unpermitted activity on this property. I'm just here for a preliminary site assessment." His professionalism was a stark contrast to Karen's blustering. He was all business. I showed him the property stakes, the full extent of the damage, and the precise location of the seasonal creek bed as marked by the surveyors. He took his own measurements, his own photos, and a few soil samples. He asked me a series of direct, unemotional questions about the timeline, which I answered precisely. He didn't offer opinions or sympathies. He just gathered facts. After about an hour, he seemed satisfied. "Thank you for your cooperation, Mr. Miller," he said, extending a hand. "We have everything we need for now." And then came the moment I had been waiting for. He turned and began walking, not back to his car, but across the street and 2 houses down, directly toward Karen's immaculate, perfectly manicured property. I retreated to my front porch, sitting down in an Adirondack chair with a tall glass of iced tea, and watched the show. Karen was outside, watering a hanging basket of petunias. She saw Agent Davies approaching her driveway, and her face immediately clouded over with suspicion. She put down her watering can, crossed her arms, and waited for him, the picture of indignant authority. I was too far away to hear the words, but I could read the body language perfectly. He introduced himself. Her posture became more rigid. He started speaking, gesturing back toward my property. She began talking over him, her hands waving dismissively. He remained perfectly still, letting her vent. He was a rock, and she was an angry wave crashing against him. Her voice got louder. I could hear snippets of it drifting across the lawns. "Ridiculous. HOA business, private property, harassing me." Agent Davies just stood there. When she finally paused to take a breath, he said something to her in a low, calm voice and held up his tablet. Her face went pale. I knew exactly what he was showing her, the signed work order, her signature on a government screen next to a federal statute. The color drained from her cheeks, her blustering stopped. She looked like she had been punched in the gut. He spoke for another few minutes, his tone never changing. Then he handed her a thick envelope, turned and walked back to his car without a backward glance. He didn't even look in my direction as he drove away. Karen stood frozen on her driveway for a full minute, the envelope clutched in her hand as if it were a venomous snake. Then she seemed to crumple, her shoulders slumping. The Empress had been dethroned, not by me, but by the dispassionate weight of the law she had so arrogantly ignored. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within an hour, my phone started buzzing. It was Jessica. "Jack, what is going on? There was a man from the government at Karen's house. She looks like she's seen a ghost." I explained what had happened, that the EPA had followed up on our report. The other board members, having received their own copies of my legal notice, quickly put 2 and 2 together. The panic that had been simmering in their private meetings exploded into the open. The HOA's lawyer, the one who had written the dismissive letter, apparently called an emergency meeting that very night. But this time, it wasn't a meeting Karen could control. The other board members, the ones now facing potential 6-figure fines for her actions, had turned on her. The next morning, a notice was posted on the community message board. It announced an emergency all-hands homeowners meeting to be held in 2 days' time. The agenda was a single item: discussion and vote on the EPA citation and the future of the board. The public exposure I had envisioned was about to happen. Karen had tried to shame me with bylaw violations and public scorn. Now she was about to face a far more potent form of public humiliation, brought on entirely by her own hubris. The final act was about to begin, and the entire community had a front row seat. The night of the emergency meeting, the community clubhouse was packed. Every seat was filled, and people were standing along the walls and spilling out into the hallway. The atmosphere was electric with tension, gossip, and anger. This wasn't the bored, semi-attentive crowd from the last meeting. This was a mob that smelled blood in the water. I arrived early and took a seat in the back row, with Mrs. Gable on one side and Jessica and Tom on the other. I had a laptop bag with me, containing my projector and a USB drive. I was prepared. Karen and the other 4 board members were already at the front table. The difference in their demeanor was stark. The other 4, 2 men and 2 women who had always been Karen's loyal rubber stamps, looked pale, terrified, and angry. They sat stiffly in their chairs, refusing to look at Karen. Karen, on the other hand, was trying to project an air of defiant confidence, but it was a brittle facade. She was dressed in a severe black pantsuit, her face caked with too much makeup, and her eyes darted around the room, flinching every time she met someone's gaze. One of the other board members, a man named Frank, nervously tapped the microphone. "Can I have everyone's attention?" he began, his voice shaky. "As you know, we're here tonight to discuss a serious matter." He cleared his throat. "The HOA has received a formal notice of violation from the United States Environmental Protection Agency." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. The notice alleges that the association authorized unpermitted work in a protected wetland area and is subject to significant financial penalties. He paused, taking a deep breath. "The preliminary fine cited in the notice is $150,000. The room erupted. People gasped. Shouts of "What?" and "How?" echoed off the beige walls. Frank held up his hands, trying to regain control. "Furthermore," he continued, his voice cracking, "the EPA has also issued a personal citation to the authorizing party, President Karen Peters, in the amount of $37,500. A collective gasp, followed by a dead, shocked silence. Every eye in the room swiveled to Karen. Her facade finally shattered. Her face, already pale, went ashen. She stared straight ahead, her hands clenched on the table in front of her. This was the moment Karen tried to save herself by throwing me to the wolves. She grabbed the microphone from Frank. "This is all his fault," she shrieked, pointing a trembling finger at me in the back of the room. "He is the one who planted that illegal weed field. He is the one who refused to follow the rules. He brought this on all of us with his vindictive, frivolous complaint to the government. He is trying to destroy our community because he couldn't get his way." The accusation hung in the air. A few people turned to look at me, their expressions uncertain. This was my cue. I stood up, calm and ready. "Frank," I said, my voice carrying easily in the silent room, "if I may, I'd like to present a brief timeline of events. I believe it will clarify how we got here." Before Karen could object, Frank, desperate to deflect the blame from himself, nodded eagerly. "Yes, please, Mr. Miller." I walked to the front, set up my small projector, and aimed it at the blank wall behind the board table. The first image that appeared was a beautiful, sunlit photo of my meadow in full bloom. "This," I began, "is the illegal weed field Karen is referring to. A native pollinator habitat that supported hundreds of species." I clicked to the next slide. It was a copy of my first response to the HOA, the one where I cited state environmental laws. Then the next slide, the audio file from the sham meeting. I played the clip of Karen ramming the vote through, ignoring the nays. The room was dead silent, listening to her own voice condemn her. Next, a slide with the time-stamped photos of the destroyed meadow. Then the damning evidence, a high-resolution image of the work order, with Karen's signature clearly visible, attesting that she had all the necessary permits. "The landscaping company owner has provided a sworn statement," I explained, "that President Peters assured him the job was fully approved and legal." I then showed the stills from my security cameras of her trespassing, her face illuminated by her phone. The murmurs in the room grew into a low growl of anger. Finally, I put up the last slide. It was a side-by-side comparison. On the left was our formal notice to the board, the one offering them a chance to settle this internally. On the right was their lawyer's arrogant, dismissive response. 10 days ago," I said, turning to face the audience, "we gave the board a chance to handle this. We warned them about the wetland. We showed them the evidence. We asked them to hold Karen accountable and fix the damage. In response, they, under Karen's direction, called our claim frivolous and rejected the offer. They could have avoided all of this. The massive fine to our community, the legal fees, all of it. But President Peters' arrogance wouldn't allow it. She would rather risk bankrupting the HOA than admit she was wrong." I turned off the projector. The case was made. The room was a tinderbox, and I had just lit the match. Mrs. Gable stood up, her voice shaking but strong. "She's a bully. She fined me for a garden gnome my dead husband gave me." Tom stood up. "She ignored the proper voting procedures. We all saw it." The dam broke. One by one, people stood up, shouting their own stories of Karen's petty fines, her threats, her reign of terror. It was a full-blown mutiny. Frank, seeing his chance, banged the gavel. "I'd like to make a motion," he said, his voice now strong and clear. "I move for a vote of no confidence in President Karen Peters and for her immediate removal from the board of directors." Another board member immediately seconded the motion. The room erupted in cheers. "All in favor of removing Karen Peters from the board?" Frank yelled. A deafening roar of "Aye" filled the room. It was nearly unanimous. "All opposed?" Silence. Not a single voice spoke in her defense. Her cronies, her allies, even Gary, all sat silent, saving their own skins. Frank banged the gavel. "The motion carries. Karen Peters, you are hereby removed from the board, effective immediately." Karen just sat there, stunned, as if she couldn't process what had happened. Her little kingdom had crumbled to dust in the space of 15 minutes. She was no longer president. She was just a woman facing a $37,500 fine and the open contempt of her entire community. The war was over. Justice, swift and public, had been served. In the weeks that followed the great reckoning at the clubhouse, the entire culture of Oakmont Creek shifted. It was as if a fever had broken. The remaining board members, humbled and terrified of further legal action, became remarkably cooperative. Frank was elected the new interim president, and his first official act was to call a special session to unanimously repeal Amendment 7-4B, the Jack Miller Amendment. My right to have a meadow was now officially enshrined. Their second act was to fire the arrogant HOA lawyer who had given them such poor advice and hire a new, more sensible firm. On the advice of their new counsel, the HOA's insurance provider, facing a massive lawsuit if they didn't cooperate, agreed to pay the full $28,000 for the restoration of my meadow. They also had to cover the bulk of the $150,000 EPA fine levied against the HOA, a hit that would cause everyone's dues to go up for the next 5 years, a constant, galling reminder of Karen's folly. I didn't just take the money and throw down some seeds. I hired a local environmental consulting firm to oversee the restoration properly. A team of young, enthusiastic ecologists spent a week on my property. They brought in nutrient-rich topsoil to replace what the brush hogs had scraped away. They carefully regraded the area around the seasonal creek bed, planting it with water-loving sedges and rushes to create a natural biofilter. Then they seeded the entire acre not just with the flowers I had used, but with an even more diverse mix of native grasses and forbs, a phase 2 of Sarah's original dream. The community's involvement was the most unexpected and rewarding part. Jessica and Tom brought their kids over to help spread seed. Mrs. Gable, her garden gnome now proudly displayed back in its spot, would bring us lemonade. Other neighbors, people I had only ever waved to before, stopped by to offer help or just to say they were sorry for what happened and glad I had stood my ground. The destroyed meadow, a symbol of division and conflict, became a focal point for a new sense of community. We weren't just restoring a piece of land. We were rebuilding the neighborhood's spirit. I saw Karen only once more. It was about 2 months after the meeting. A large moving truck was parked in her driveway. Her perfectly manicured lawn, the one she had held up as the standard for the entire neighborhood, now had a "for sale" sign planted in the middle of it. I learned from Frank that the personal EPA fine was not dischargeable in bankruptcy. Between that, her share of the HOA's legal fees, and the social ostracization, her position in the community had become untenable. She had to sell her house to pay her debts. I was walking back from my mailbox as she was carrying a box of knickknacks to her car. She saw me and froze. All the fight was gone from her. She looked smaller, diminished, her gaudy jewelry and power suits replaced by a simple drab sweatsuit. There was no triumph in me, no desire to gloat. Her defeat was so total, so absolute, that there was nothing left to say. I just gave her a slight, simple nod, a gesture of acknowledgement, not of forgiveness or friendship, and continued walking back to my house. She quickly loaded the box and disappeared inside, and I never saw her again. That evening, I sat on my porch looking out over the healing land. The new seeds had already begun to sprout, a faint green fuzz covering the dark earth. A few of the hardier perennials from the original planting were even sending up new shoots from their deep roots, survivors of the destruction. The air was quiet, filled only with the sound of crickets and the gentle breeze rustling the leaves of the old oak tree in my yard. I thought about the fight, the cold anger, the meticulous planning, the satisfaction of the victory. But the victory itself wasn't the point. The point was the restoration. The point was that you can't let bullies, petty or otherwise, win. You can't let them tear down something beautiful and alive just to satisfy their own need for control. You have to stand your ground, not just for yourself, but for the principles that matter. My meadow would grow back, stronger and more diverse than before. The bees and the butterflies were already starting to return, drawn to the few volunteer flowers blooming along the edges. The community, too, was healing, learning to value life and diversity over sterile conformity. I picked up the old worn napkin with Sarah's drawing on it, which I now kept in a small frame on my porch table. Her dream had been violated, but it had not been defeated. In the end, her vision of a place that was truly alive had won. And in the quiet peace of that evening, I felt a sense of closure, a sense of justice, and for the first time in a long time, a profound and lasting sense of home.